Good afternoon and welcome to our Family Voice Zoom session this afternoon. My name's Andrew McColl. I'm the Queensland Director of Family Voice, and it's my pleasure to welcome Lyle Shelton this afternoon to our Zoom. Lyle is formerly a Chief of Staff and Managing Director of Australian Christian Lobby. He's now the National Director of Family First Political Party since May 2022. Lyle is married to Wendy. They have 4 adult children and 1 grandchild.
Two now.
Lyle, welcome to our Zoom today.
Thanks, Andrew. We've actually got 2 grandchildren now. One was born in another one was born in January.
Fantastic. Great. So, Lyle, just thinking about the election that's coming up, obviously in a couple of weeks' time, how do you think federal politics is shaping this time around?
I think it's disastrous, Andrew. I am very disappointed with the lack of leadership in this nation coming from both sides of politics. I think our nation has got a number of very big challenges facing it economically and socially, and neither party are dealing with the systemic issues that we face, and neither are offering the solutions that we need. And I think a big part of that is the apathy of the population. We want what's in it for us, and life's been pretty comfortable in Australia, but I think we've got a rude awakening coming unless we change track pretty quickly.
There's been lots of talk, Lyle, about the cost of living today in Australia. Do you think there's anything else of impact that you're seeing?
Yeah, look. Obviously, the cost of living is massive. We've got a housing affordability crisis. We've got a cost of living crisis. People can't afford houses. Young people can't afford to marry and form a family because they can't afford a house. Those who can are struggling to pay their electricity bills because electricity is expensive. The cost of everything's up. So this is disastrous economically, particularly for the next generation. And then other impacts, well, look, I mentioned we've got a social crisis as well. I mean, marriage and family breakdown continues to be at very high levels. We've got a freedom of speech, freedom of religion crisis. We've got a crisis of identity in that we've got ideology teaching children that their gender is fluid, and that's had all sorts of disastrous flow-on effects for thousands of Australian children who are being poisoned with puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones and even having their bodies mutilated. And again, neither side of politics is wanting to address the nonsense of gender fluid ideology. So, Andrew, wherever you look, there's economic and social problems galore. And I'm despairing because neither side of politics seems interested in addressing these issues.
Do you think there's a chance that the Labor Party could lose outright?
No, I don't think so. I think Peter Dutton is letting the election slip through his fingers because of his timidity. I think if he said that he was not going to do net zero and to withdraw Australia from the climate accords in Paris, and if he said that the coalition would jettison gender fluid ideologies, I think he'd win the election in a landslide, but he doesn't have the courage to say those things. And I think Labor and the Greens look set to form some sort of a coalition government, which I think will be disastrous for our country.
Right. The coalition and the Labor Party don't seem to be much different. Why is this, Lyle?
I think over the last several decades, we've seen a merging of public policy positions. Some would call it wokeism, that has infiltrated the universities, the media, corporate Australia. So there's been, I guess, a consensus on the sort of centre left of politics, driven by the radical left, but it's sort of moved into the centre that has agreed that there's a climate emergency, so that's driving energy policy. That's led to our electricity crisis, a crisis of cost, and also a crisis of reliability. So that agenda has permeated everywhere, both sides of politics. Social policy agendas like same-sex marriage, like abortion, and then the flow-on effects of those things as they affect freedom of speech and freedom of religion have flowed through. So you've got, the Liberal Party essentially in agreement with the Green Left on the so-called climate emergency, on gender fluid ideology, and certainly in agreement on protecting abortion all the way to birth. So that's a consensus that exists across the political spectrum, and that nexus needs to be broken. I think with some courage it could be. There's some good people in the coalition, but they're not allowed to speak, and the ones who do are just ignored. So we're stuck with this impasse.
So do you think the coalition is really conservative, or have they shifted to the left?
No, the coalition has shifted to the Green left, and we've seen this over many years. I mean, the fact, there's lots of examples. Peter Dutton's Liberals, or the Liberals and Nationals, answered the Australian Christian Lobby's pre-election survey on the simple question of, will they restore the definition of woman to the Sex Discrimination Act? The coalition, Liberals and the National Party, the conservative side of Australian politics, have said they will not commit to restoring the definition of woman in the Sex Discrimination Act. That act was vandalised back in 2013 when Julia Gillard was Prime Minister. Mark Dreyfus, the then Attorney General, who's currently our Attorney General again, smuggled in the words gender identity into that act. What that act means, what our law says at the moment, is that a man can identify as a woman. It says that a woman can have a penis. Forgive me for the crass language, but that's what that piece of legislation means. The idea that Peter Dutton from the conservative side of politics would go to the Australian people saying, vote for me, I think a woman can have a penis, is just ridiculous. And it shows that the Liberal Party are not a conservative party. I can give you many other examples. I'll give you another important one on that gender space, because I know many of your viewers will be concerned, as I am, about this. The child gender clinics, which are injecting children as young as 10 with puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, and seeing them go on to have mutilating surgery. Dozens, if not hundreds, of adolescent girls have had their breasts cut off in Australia. Thousands of kids are on puberty blockers at the moment. So Peter Dutton's approach to that is that he will grant his members of Parliament a conscience vote as to whether there should be an inquiry into the child gender clinics. Now, I mean, this is just timid, insipid leadership. He doesn't need an inquiry as to whether he doesn't need a conscience vote as to whether there should be an inquiry. He just needs to shut them down. If the Keir Starmer Labor government in the UK can shut down the gender clinics and ban puberty blockers, the wokest Prime Minister in the Anglosphere, why can't Australia's Conservative alternative Prime Minister take a position to an Australian election to protect children from the harms of gender fluid ideology? The Liberal Party are not a conservative political party. They've been hijacked by the Green left on climate and on gender and on abortion. And they are not what many Christians who, like myself, have grown up voting Conservative, think that they once were.
So having said all that, Lyle, where does Family First fit in here?
Well, I guess we're on the political scene because of the concern we have over the drift of the conservative side of politics to the Green left. And we think it's necessary. I personally can't see any other alternative but to try and carve out some space in the political discourse and in Parliament itself for people who will boldly fight for the truth about marriage, the truth about gender, the truth about a functioning economy, and the truth about the human rights of the unborn. These are things which the Liberal Party have completely abandoned. Of course, Labor long abandoned them, but the Liberals as well now. And so I think the response that we're making as a very small fledgling political movement is we've got to raise a voice for the truth of economic and social policy in politics. And our hope and desire, if not at this election, but in elections to come, to break through and get a critical mass of courageous people sitting in the upper houses of state and federal parliaments to try and drag the politics of our nation back to the sensible centre again.
Fair enough. Just before I ask you any further questions, Lyle, I'll just explain to our viewers today that if they have a question to put to you, they can write that out on their computer and post that off. Daryl Budge, who is with me in WA, he's our moderator today. So he will take those comments, and when we've finished our kind of first batch of questions, Lyle, I'll be taking questions from him in WA as he moderates those questions. So what we have seen during the last term of the Senate is that there's been some moves to debate abortion, vaccination mandates and other matters. Has this been good?
Well, look, of course, it's been good that these issues have been raised and ventilated. And, I said earlier, there are some good parliamentarians in the Liberal Party. My friend Matt Canavan and Alex Antic and others. And there's some good crossbenchers like Senator Ralph Babette and Malcolm Roberts and a few others. So, some of these guys have got together and they've tried to raise the issue of babies born alive after failed abortions.
Yeah.
And when they've done that, Simon Birmingham, the then Liberal leader in the Senate, has voted against these moves, as has people like Maria Kavokovic, if I've pronounced her name correctly, Senator Jane Hume. So the mainstream of the Liberal Party keep voting down these moves. Pauline Hanson and Alex Antic have both put forward motions or bills in the Senate in this last term of Parliament to have inquiries into the gender clinics. Again, the Liberals have voted against those things, apart from a couple of notable exceptions. So, Peter Dutton should be saying to Simon Birmingham and his team in the Senate that these are mainstream issues of concern to mainstream Australians, and tell his people to stop trying to stifle them. But he doesn't do that. His leadership in the Senate actively votes against pro-family and pro-life positions all the time. And the only way I think we can send Peter Dutton and the coalition a message is to vote one for a party like Family First or another minor party if people choose to do so. But don't give your primary vote to the Liberal Party. They need to be taught a lesson.
I understand. Lyle, the NDIS has been a massive drain on the taxpayer, and it's only getting worse year by year. What do you think should be its future?
Look, the NDIS is a lovely idea, and ensuring that we, as a society, are compassionate and provide great support to people who have disabilities and their families. It's a wonderful thing, but we've got to be able to afford it. At the moment, it's costing, I think I'm right in saying, more than Medicare or getting close to it. And it's right up there with our defence budget. It's unsustainable spending. And so it needs to be reformed, and we need to provide what assistance we can as a society, but in a way that doesn't break the bank. Next year, our nation's debt will hit more than $1 trillion. We've got 10 years of deficit budgets in front of us. I mean, this is unprecedented in my lifetime. And it's completely unsustainable. And so, yes, it's nice to look after disabled people, and it's good if we can afford it, but we can't afford it at the moment. And so we need some sort of a reform of the system. I think we need to also think about what we as community groups can do to help those who are disabled amongst us, and to provide relief and care for family members who are carers. And I think there's a real role for churches in this, and for voluntary assistance to people. It doesn't all have to be done on the taxpayer's dime. Some of it, can and must be, of course. But at the moment, we've gone way over the top in this spending. It's unsustainable, and we've got a situation where our budget is it's now a form of intergenerational theft, where our generation is forcing our kids and our grandkids to pay for our largesse and our consumption at this moment in time, and that's unjust to them.
Well, I've certainly seen some cases of this just locally here, where somebody I know who's in pretty good health, he seems to have pretty much all of his faculties mentally, but he's on a support and getting NDIS cover, and that means someone comes to see him every week or so. They take some time together, go out for coffee, and the taxpayer's paying for this. And I think, well, gee, I mean, he just needs some friendship, some company. Does he need the taxpayer to be paying for that?
No, this is emblematic of the breakdown of community in our society, the breakdown of groups like churches and even localism in our streets. And we've got to find a way to look out for each other better as a community. We shouldn't have to pay someone to go and have a coffee, or to take someone on a cruise funded by the NDIS, as nice as that is. And I don't begrudge people who are sick and disabled having those sort of recreational opportunities. But again, surely civil society can attend to some of these needs, and not just all of it on the taxpayer, particularly when we can't afford it.
Yeah. But just looking at things, you've been involved with the life of politics in Canberra for some time now. What kind of impact can Christians have in Canberra, and do the parliamentarians want to listen to them?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I spent 10 years of my life based in Canberra working with Australian Christian Lobby, and I really enjoyed that time. It was a privilege to work there, and we had a lot of support from Christians all over the nation. I was privileged to be mentored by a great man in Jim Wallace. And look, we did our best over many, many years to work with the politicians there to build relationship. And of course, ACL's work in that is ongoing through Michelle Pearce, who's a good friend. We worked together back in my early days at ACL. So that work is necessary, but it's hard because the politicians are listening less and less to us. And I think all of us as who call ourselves Christians in this country need to really pick up our game. We need to get behind groups that are doing advocacy work like ACL, like Family Voice, and others. And obviously, I would say like political parties like Family First, we need lots of tanks on the battlefield doing different things, but all pushing towards the same goal, which is to ensure that Christian and pro-family and pro-life values have a place in our politics. And the forces pushing back on those things, as you would know, Andrew, through your work, are quite intense. And this is not a day to slacken off; it's a day to redouble our efforts.
So should there be a mild election swing to the coalition, but there's a Labor Greens minority government formed, which might be similar to the Julia Gillard period, could that be short-lived?
I think it will be. I think what we've seen in the United States with a radical Democrat administration under Joe Biden, which really did aggressively prosecute a radical agenda economically and socially. Their open borders policy was there for all to see. It was quite disastrous. And of course, they doubled down on the whole gender fluid ideology issue. And Donald Trump came in. And again, there's issues with Donald Trump's character, but I like his policies and his clarity. He came in and said, we're going to have a sovereign nation. We're not going to have open borders anymore. So he shut the border almost immediately, which just shows what you can do with political will. He said, we're not doing transgender anymore. He signed that beautiful executive order defunding any organization that teaches children their gender is fluid, defunded the gender clinics. His most powerful advertisement during the election period, which really moved the swing states in his favor, was the advertisement with the catchphrase, Kamala Harris is for they, them, but I'm for you. And that galvanized voters. And I've seen polling which shows that that transgender issue was just as big an issue in the minds of voters as was the open border issue, which, galvanized so many people. So, look, I think if we have a Labor Greens government, they will pursue a similar ideological path economically and socially as what we saw with Biden and Kamala Harris. And I think the public will react to it. I think Australians haven't sufficiently woken up to just how insidious the ideology, and that's just a big word for the ideas that animate the green left of politics. And by that, I include the left of the Liberal Party, which believes the same thing. I think 3 years of that in Australia will shock us if it doesn't bankrupt us in the meantime. And I think there will be a swing back, but there'll be some pain before that happens.
Speaking locally, Lyle, we've got a new Queensland government, of course, of the LNP since October last year, now being about 6 months. They've been a disappointment in numbers of ways, and we still have 50-cent train fares in Brisbane, which was a Labor Party initiative, of course. Do you think political leaders put pressure on their MPs to compromise and toe the line for reasons of personal expediency?
Of course they do. This is the malady with our politics at the moment, and David Crucifeli is one of the worst. But they're all like this. The idea that you've still got 50-cent fares again in a state like Queensland, which has got again unsustainable debt. The state cannot afford 50-cent fares. Look, everyone loves free stuff from the government. So who's going to vote against that? Do they put pressure on the MPs? Well, you and I saw this in December last year when Crucifeli smuggled at the last minute, put a gag motion into the Parliament gagging all of his members on the issue of human rights for unborn babies. That motion says they can't talk about this for 4 years, and they all voted for it, including 20 or so Christians. I was deeply shocked. I've known many of these people for years. I've seen them get up at pro-life rallies and pro-life fundraising dinners and say how they are all for the human rights of the unborn babies and support for their mothers, and then they voted for this. To me, that was one of the darkest days of my time as a political activist and observer, watching a whole bunch of Christians and conservative MPs vote for this. They should have crossed the floor. There should have been a mass rebellion. They should have rebelled 12 months before the state election, because in fairness to Crucifeli, he said that he went to that election 12 months out saying he was going to support abortion to birth, and none of the Christian candidates or MPs opposed that or did anything to try and stop him for 12 months. That was on the public record. He went into the Australian newspaper, The Guardian. He said, this is what we're doing. And Christians stood beside him, pro-life Christians stood beside him, taking that policy to the election. This is not a time for silence in the face of evil. And this is why we're doing Family First, because the Christians in the LNP don't stand up anymore.
Do you think this is possibly a lesson for us all, that it's easy to be, pronouncing all the right statements before you get into the parliament, but when it actually happens and the pressure is on, it seems to be that there's a tendency to become kind of chocolate soldiers, hey?
Totally. Totally. Look, courage is the missing ingredient in politics, and it's too easy to go with the flow, to drink the Kool-Aid, to want the advancement that comes with being part of the club. One of the books that influenced me, I read it during the marriage campaign back in 2017, was Os Guinness's book, Impossible People. He said Christians must be unclubbable. I've never heard that word, but it means that you're not able to be brought into the club because we all stand on our principles. And I guess that's one of the things that I observed over 10 years as a lobbyist in Canberra. I just saw too many Christians becoming part of the club. Obviously, during the marriage campaign, that's what really, I guess, stirred my heart to want to do something in the minor party world, because the Christians in the Liberal Party were, too many of them were silent, and particularly the high profile ones like Scott Morrison chose not to participate in the biggest cultural change that our country has made in my lifetime, with enormous consequences for children and for freedom of speech. And one of Australia's most public Christians in one of the holding some of the highest offices in the land chose to be silent in the face of this great evil. So, I'm tired of silent Liberals. They're no good. And we've got to change. We've got to have parliamentarians who will speak. And, that's obviously why we're doing Family First, because I'm sick of the silent Liberals. I'm thankful for the ones who are vocal, like, Matt Canavan and Alex Antic, and there's probably a few others, always dangerous naming names. But what I've observed is that the mainstream of the Liberal Party, they just ignore them. That they try and they'll expel anyone lower down the ranks, like Bernie Finn, who's now running for Family First to the Senate in Victoria. He's a former Liberal who was expelled. They tried to get rid of Moira Deeming. She fought back, good on her, and won. They don't bother with Matt and Alex because they're now too powerful. They can't do what they did to Bernie and Moira. And Elizabeth Kickett, who's also now with Family First. The Liberal Party wouldn't let me back in because, they don't want people who are going to fight for these sort of values. So we've got no choice but to set up, an alternative resistance movement, and that's what we've done.
Just changing gears for a moment, Lyle, do you think it's wise that the taxpayer today is compelled to fund political parties?
No, I don't. I don't like it. Now, Family First does accept money. We've benefited from public funding because from the elections we've run in South Australia, Victoria, and soon we've put in a claim for our efforts in the Queensland election. We've done well enough as a minor party to qualify for public funding, but we didn't write the rules. The Liberal and the Labor parties are getting, and the Greens and One Nation get millions of dollars as a result of their electoral activities. So look, whilst the system's in place, we're very happy to take money away from the Liberal Party and the Labor Party and have it go to Family First, where we qualify for it when you achieve over 4% of the vote in a certain electorate or an upper house election. We want to apply that money for good, but look, I can envisage a time in the future where, if we get to a point where we have influence in Parliament, I'd be wanting to see that reformed. I don't think the taxpayer should be funding political parties, but we're quite happy to take the money at the moment because that's the way the system is, and we need it to try and break through into the parliaments to try and beat them at their own game.
Sure, sure. Over the years, Lyle, you've seen the highs and lows of Australian politics. What's your advice to those considering putting their hat in the ring?
I think really know that you're called by God if you're a Christian. If you're not a Christian, I'd try and find God because it is a big spiritual battle. I'd have a good prayer team around you, and seek good mentors, people who are older and wiser. It's probably one of the most fraught areas anyone can involve themselves in. There's lots of traps for young players, but we certainly need people of courage and wisdom to go into Parliament. And I would encourage any young person who's thinking about it to, first of all, be a godly person, have a strong relationship with Christ, be someone who is a student of God's word and be a reader of politics and history, have good mentors, and then start to build your support base in your local community, so that you've got support for your political run. We definitely need people of character in politics, and we need them in all the parties. And I've been very critical this afternoon about the Liberal Party, and I don't resile from that, but I admire the people that are staying in the Liberal Party. I think that's a valid strategy. It's not an either or, all come out to Family First or all staying at the Liberal Party. You need good people in both, and you need good people on the inside, but you also need the voices like Family First on the outside to try and keep them honest.
Good. So just turning it over now, Lyle, to my colleague in WA, Daryl Budge. Daryl, do you have any questions that have come in from our audience today for Lyle?
Yes, I do have some great questions today. Graham asks, the election of President Trump, you talked about him a bit. Are there any more lessons other than what you mentioned that should give some energy to conservative parties of lessons and strategies that have been very effective in stirring voters? The Liberal Party seems so attached to the moderate middle. How do we actually convince them, as the example of Trump has shown, to abandon that and go for the truly conservative traditional voter?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one I think about all the time. I think politicians, we need political leaders who will do the right thing, not just try and get elected all the time. And sometimes that can come with a cost, and that's, my friends in politics will say that's easy for you, Lyle. You're in the cheap seats and you don't have to, placate a constituency as such. But I just think, Abraham Lincoln had it right. He said, if you tell the people the truth and level with them, they will come with you. And at the moment, Peter Dutton is not doing that. He's pandering to our base instincts for, we want some cost of living relief. Well, of course we do, but just cutting the fuel excise or, giving out tax breaks for new home buyers, that's tinkering around the edges. It's not dealing with the root causes of the cost of living crisis or the housing crisis. And of course, Labor is even worse. The cash splash by both sides in the lead up to this election is unbelievable for a nation that's in $1 trillion worth of debt. So to the question, we need politicians who will tell us this is the problem. We're in $1 trillion worth of debt. This is how we chart our way out. We have a housing crisis. This is our plan to release more land. This is our plan to allow couples to get ahead by income splitting or whatever. But none of that is happening. It's all just doling out the cash without showing leadership to deal with the issues that matter. And I think, love him or hate him, Trump showed clear leadership, and he withstood the biggest barrage I've ever seen against any political leader. I mean, they tried to destroy him. Literally, I mean, the lawfare was unbelievable, the media attacks. What that man withstood, and I think he's got some real deep character flaws, but courage isn't, lack of courage isn't one of them. And 2 assassination attempts. Unbelievable, the greatest political comeback in history. I just think that I'd love to see a Trump-like figure, not his personality, but Trump policies with a statesman-like approach, I think could win the day.
Mm, mm. There's been a few questions about the Family First preferences and people asking who else can they preference, but because of in this election, at like the last, we can number every box above the line or number all the candidates below the line. So lots of people have been asking about who should they preference. But they know of Australian Christians and Family First and other parties that they would say probably most aligned to Family Voice supporters. What about all the rest?
Well, look, how people preference is up to them. We've made some recommendations, and they're just suggestions, and they're on our website, so people can get a bit of an idea there. But you know, my advice is certainly, obviously, I'm going to say vote 1 for Family First, because that that sends a powerful message that there's people who believe in what we're saying. If you want the Liberal Party to win over the Labor Party, and again, I've been very critical of Peter Dutton, the Liberal Party, but they'll still be better than the Labor Greens government. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to vote 1 for Family First, obviously in the Senate and the lower house. I'll put some of the other minor parties that are, you know, similarly aligned. None of them are perfectly aligned with our values, but there's a lot of commonality. And then I'll put the Liberals somewhere down towards the end. And then I'll put, you know, probably Labor, the Teals and the Greens. That way, my vote will cascade. If Family First, you know, obviously we're not going to get elected in a lower house seat. Hopefully we've got a chance in some Senate seats. It's a long shot, but it's definitely worth having a go at. But if we miss out, our vote then will cascade and find its way eventually to the Liberal Party. So it's not a wasted vote. It's actually the most powerful vote you can cast, is to vote for a minor party, you know, parties that align with your values. And then, you know, if you want a conservative or supposedly conservative or a less bad government, just make sure the Liberals are above Labor, Teals and the Greens.
Mm. And voting a first preference for that party would actually help with electoral funding, because it's only the first preference that counts for. Yeah,
correct. That's absolutely right. Some people think, oh, we really like you, Lyle. You're a nice bloke. We'll give you our number 2. You know, now that's no good, because that doesn't help us at all. It doesn't send a message to the Liberal Party, which they need to hear. So people need to make sure they vote 1 for Family First or 1 for whatever minor party they prefer. I hope it's Family First. And then make sure that, you know, the major party of your choice is somewhere down the ticket.
Mm. Claudia asks a bit of a tricky question. You've made a deal with the coalition in some electorates. You've put them second and they've put you second. How does this work if you don't align with them on a lot of policies? At what point do you put the politics of politics before values?
Well, look, the reality, as I've just explained, whether we put the Liberals number 2 or number 5, our vote's still going to go to the Liberals. So that's just a reality. So if you want to be really pure, you know, vote informal. So that's the first point. Your question is right. In Victoria, the Liberals approached us. We weren't seeking to do any deals. And again, just remember that anything we put on a how to vote card is a suggestion. It's not a ticket. It's not compulsory for anyone to follow. It's a suggestion. But the Liberals came to us in Victoria, and for reasons only known to them, they said we would like to do a 2-for-2 deal. Now, that was very attractive for us because we've got a fantastic Senate candidate in Victoria by the name of Bernie Finn, who was expelled from the Liberal Party for saying that he prays for an end to abortion. And they wanted to do a 2-for-2. Now, that was, as I say, that was attractive to us. That helps Bernie in the Senate big time, because the Liberals will probably have a substantial leftover quota after they get 2 senators up. They're trying to get 3 senators up. That's their hope. They're hoping that our preferences might help get their number 3 Senate candidate up. Now, we looked very carefully at that because whether we did a 2-for-2 deal with them depended on who that last person on the Liberal Senate ticket was. And it turns out, and I've just forgotten his name, but he's actually a conservative, pro-life fellow. I believe he's a Christian. So he's someone who aligns with our values. So we had no trouble with our preferences potentially helping the number 3 on the Liberal ticket. We're hoping that their preferences will actually help us and get Bernie up. So that's the attraction of the deal. Now, the part of it that's less attractive is that our agreement was then to preference them number 2 in lower house seats throughout Victoria. Now, we don't have there's no possibility of us getting lower house candidates elected in Victoria. Our lower house candidates are very kindly running with us to help lift Bernie's Senate vote. That's the whole strategy, and to raise the awareness of Family First. Hopefully one day we'll be competitive enough to get 25% of the vote, which is needed to get a lower house seat. So there will be some electorates, yes, where there's some bad Liberals who will get a Family First number 2 preference. But as I said, whether they're number 2 or number 5, our votes were always going to cascade back to the Liberals. So yes, there is an element of pragmatism in that. It's not our most favourite thing to do, but do you walk away from an opportunity to help get a pro-life, pro-family warrior like Bernie Finn elected, or do you miss that opportunity to stay completely pure in the lower house, knowing that your votes are going to flow to the Liberals anyway? So these are not easy decisions, but I think at the end of the day, when you're faced with it is a bit of an ethical conundrum, but at the end of the day, I think it's worth making that compromise to help the possibility of getting a guy like Bernie to the Senate, and that should be something all minor parties should cheer. But there's a lot of insider baseball going on about that at the moment, and we're not everyone's favourite people, but that's life and it's politics, and
politics is like baseball, yes. And I do agree that Bernie is an excellent fellow. He's been doing some fantastic work for many, many years inside the Victorians, and we do pray that Moira can survive the stabbing of the Victorian Liberals right now too. Yeah. So Ron asks, do you have any candidates running in Tasmania? Are you covering all states?
Yeah, no, we don't in Tasmania or Western Australia. Look, we're a small outfit. For the last few years, it's basically been me and my laptop and some very committed volunteers. We've now got a couple of part-time staff that are helping us, but it's a small operation, and we just haven't had the bandwidth to get down to Tassie or over to WA. But we hope to in the future. But yeah, unfortunately, this election we've only got candidates in Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, and South Australia.
Mm-hmm. And he asks, how can we best convince others that we can control our own preferences? People are often quite lazy voters that basically just vote to avoid a fine and put no thought into it. How do you think we should convince them to vote carefully and wisely?
That's really hard. Look, well, by doing webinars like today, obviously, and that's a great public service. Unfortunately, civics isn't taught in school the way it should be, if it is at all. So people just don't understand our political system. And that's a tragedy, because democracy can't work unless there's an engaged citizenry. It was always meant to be thus. And we're in a situation now where we've got a disengaged citizenry. Most people don't know the difference between the upper and the lower house. And it's frightening, because these people have to vote, and they do vote, and they don't know what they're doing. So more of this is part of the answer.
Yeah. So I've got a few of my own questions here. There's some more tricky questions. What is your view about superannuation versus the state pension? Now, we've got this conundrum of people supposedly having to be forced to save with their superannuation system. However, there's massive tax breaks that are occurring in that, plus people are being unable to save for a house. Now, what's your view, and what's your party's view on superannuation versus the state pension?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. Look, we are a minor party. We haven't developed fulsome positions on every area of policy. So what I'll say is my own opinion. I won't give it as a party position, because we simply haven't done the policy work. And I hope people will forgive us for that, because there's a huge array of policy issues. And look, over time, as we mature as a political movement, we will do that work. But look, I think broadly, the superannuation system has been a good thing. Then there's questions around, when and how can we access it? How are the tax breaks structured? for instance, in New Zealand, where my daughter lives, her and her husband will qualify to dip into their super for a home deposit. Now, I think that's a good idea because housing is unaffordable for young people, but that's one way where they can at least get a deposit. So now you can't do that in Australia. The Liberals took something like that to the last election. So I think there needs to be, some reform of the system, but I don't like the way Labor keeps wanting to tax superannuation. The idea of superannuation when it came in, compulsory superannuation, was so that it could, essentially take the burden off the taxpayer for funding people's retirements. And the idea was that, most people would not need a state-funded pension, but I don't think we've quite achieved that. So obviously there needs to be some reform. I think the reality is, and I'm probably guilty of this as well, if the government wasn't forcing us to save money through super, I don't know that I would have much super. That's a terrible admission, but it's probably not a bad thing for most of us who perhaps are not as disciplined as we should be. So I think there's a place for it, but we certainly need to see some reform of the system. And we need governments to stop tinkering with it all the time. It needs certainty as well, and not the government, continually deciding to tax, certain thresholds. I think you've got to, let that money be there for what it was destined for.
I think the deepest problem is when the government forces or the government pays for something, the price of the services for that jump up massively over time and go way ahead of the normal inflation rate. So we're paying over, $25 billion worth in fees every year. And then there's, I don't know, something like $40 billion of tax breaks. And so the total cost to our economic system is something like over $80 billion of lost fees, the fees that are paid to the sector, plus the tax breaks that are put in. So it ends up being way more expensive than a pension would be even now. So that's the issue I see, the socialist issue. When the government compels something, it ends up doing a terrible job of it. Do you have a particular view on this most recent social media age ban that was a pretty contentious issue? Does you and your party, do you have a personal position on that one?
Yeah, I do. I'm just looking for a book. Here it is. So this, I've only dabbled in and out of this. This is The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. I've heard him speak at various conferences, the ARC conference in London and the like. So he's a sociologist. He's proved incontrovertibly that these devices are frying the minds of the next generation. There's no doubt that social media is causing terrible harm to young people. So he says in the book that there should be some sort of a ban, and this has been very influential. I think from Florida to other parts around the world, different governments have looked at it, and Peter Malinauskas in South Australia has driven the debate here in this country. So I think the idea of some sort of a ban is good, and the reason he says it needs to be a ban is because the pressure on parents is so great that you can say, well, let the family take care of it, but because of the peer pressure from other families and other kids who have access to these things when your kids don't, it puts parents in an almost impossible situation. Now, my parents were really tough. They probably would have been able to withstand it if we had smartphones back in my day. But it's difficult. And so Jonathan Haidt argues that we need all of society to opt into this. And look, this is why I'm not a libertarian. The libertarians just say, well, look, let freedom reign, and no, there's times when society has to take collective action. Now, how you do that is the contentious side of it. So the Albanese government's proposed a ban which involves some sort of a digital ID, which infringes on privacy. So to me, that's the sticking point. Haidt, in his book, he says a digital ID is not the way to go. He even admits that, yes, it's tricky how you do this from a public policy point of view, but he does have some suggestions as to how it can be done. And I think that needs greater exploration. I think perhaps the left of politics have seen an opportunity for them to grab control through digital ID, and they have their nefarious reasons for wanting to control the internet. That's not where I'm coming from. I'm more in the Jonathan Haidt camp, that we need to do something. How we do it and the technology we use to do it is really important, and I think we need to have further debate on that. And I think the way the Albanese government's gone about it has been the wrong way.
Okay, so what's John on the Height's view that what's the better policy position to take?
Look, you've caught me there. Hang on.
He's trying to remember.
I've read the chapter on that. Yeah, look, I
Sorry,
won't be able to remember it offhand. It is in here. I can take it on notice. It was last year when it was going through Parliament. I dipped into this book again, and yeah, he does have some alternatives.
Okay.
And he'd be the first to say they're not perfect, but there does need to be some sort of collective action, and there is a role for government.
What's your view on abortion as a federal issue? It has become on the radar and off the radar in terms of the babies born alive issue and those things. Do you think it's a live federal issue? And we've had a bit of contention amongst some strong advocates for pro-life in the past week or a couple of weeks. Do you see it as a strong federal issue for Family First, and what is the reasons why?
The reason is that card there. Because every Australian is forced to pay for abortions through Medicare. And now I'm someone who's pro-life, who thinks it's wrong to kill an unborn baby. I have blood on my Medicare card. I should at least have the option of not being forced to participate in something which I think is morally wrong and reprehensible. Now, I want to be careful to say that I don't think the women involved are reprehensible. I think they need all the support that we can muster as a society. And I think the reason we have so many abortions is because abortion is the best thing that ever happened for men. And so women are left holding the baby literally, or having, often pressured and coerced to killing their babies. And that's a tragic, tragic state of affairs. But you and I are forced to pay for it. And successive, Liberal governments over the years, whenever budgets pass in May in Canberra, there's an item in there for Medicare funding. There's a Medicare item number that goes towards abortion. When I was in Canberra with ACL years ago, a brave Liberal senator by the name of Guy Barnett decided to move a disallowance motion on the Medicare item that funded just late-term abortion, not even all abortions. And I was there at the time. All hell broke loose in the Parliament. The huffiness, the grumpiness, the unhappiness was unbelievable. And Barnett got that issue to a Senate inquiry, and it was a huge, huge issue. And both sides of politics did their best to put that back in its bottle real quick. And that was the last time there was any substantive debate on abortion. In fact, part of my role in that, I discovered in some of the submissions that were being put forward that the Parliamentary Group on Population and Development, which represented about 40 parliamentarians, lodged a submission saying that we need to keep Medicare funding of abortion because disabled babies would be born and that they would be a burden on the disability services budget. Now, that's eugenics. And we exposed that in the inquiry. The media wouldn't cover it. Ron Boswell, great hero of mine, I fed him this information. He got up in the Senate and said, this is akin to the Hitler regime. He said that in the Senate, and he was right. So yes, abortion is a federal issue because of that. It's paid for by the taxpayer through federal appropriations in the budget. So don't let the Liberal Party ever tell you it's not a federal issue, which is what they do.
Yeah. Yes, they do try. Yes. Couple more questions. What about immigration, and how do we lift our natural birth rate in Australia?
Yeah, look, just yesterday there was a report in the Australian newspaper about our demographic collapse. I think we're at 1.4 babies per woman. The replacement level is 2.1. This has crashed since Peter Costello's baby bonus. This is diabolical for a country. We're entering a demographic winter. We're becoming extinct. And look, immigration is, we had 500,000 migrants, I think, last year. Now, I welcome people coming to this nation, but at the moment it's too much and our infrastructure can't handle it. But we need to be making sure we are replacing ourselves, not through migrants, but through, through our own reproduction. That's just, any self-respecting society. But we've got a death wish. And again, abortion is, we abort at least 100,000 babies a year that we know of. So that's a lot. But it just shows that we don't have confidence in our future. And that's a tragedy for a nation like Australia. It's one of the, it's one of the biggest issues that's facing us. And again, it's not being talked about in this election campaign. So how do we lift the birth rate? Well, we've got to make housing affordable. I know a lot of young people are not, getting married and forming families because of the economics, or they're delaying it, which means women delay their fertility decreases with age. That's just part of biology. So we've got to get the economics right. We've got to fall in love with the unborn again, so we stop aborting so many babies. We've got to create a family-friendly environment. We've got to put mum, dad, and the kids and heterosexual marriage back at the center of public policy. Again, no one in politics wants to talk about this. And this is why we have a party called Family First, because we have to put the heterosexual, monogamous, married family back at the center of public policy. And then there's other incentives we can do. I mentioned income splitting before to make it easier. We can do what Hungary has done, tax breaks for women who have children. If you have 4 children in Hungary, you are tax-free for the rest of your life. My wife would be tax-free for the rest of her life. I think those sort of government incentives are fantastic. They've got incentives for people to buy larger vehicles. We had to get a 7-seater when our 4th child was born. It was a big expense for us at the time. Imagine, if there was a bit of help. So yeah, we've got a big job to do. Birth rate's a massive issue.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all my questions, Andrew. Thanks for your frankness, Lyle, and thanks for the great questions from our audience.
Thank you, Daryl.
Thank you, Lyle. Also, from me, it's always good to talk to you again and get some views from someone who's been in the midst of all of this for quite some time. And you have seen the highs and lows, and now you're wanting to put yourself out there for the voters, and we wish you well. We hope you do well, with election, both for yourself and also for Family First. And so thanks again, and we wish you God's blessing in your campaign for the election.
Thanks very much.
Just a reminder.
Yeah.
Well, just to remind our viewers about our resources on our website, the Australian Christian Values Checklist. Family First is listed there as ticks all the 20 questions, which is great. As well as some other parties as well. That in WA we have Australian Christians as an alternative for WA voters. So just make sure you go on our website, have a look at the election resources, and look at the checklist and send that out. Sorry, Lyle, I interrupted you.
No, not at all, mate. Sorry, I was just saying thank you to both of you for having me. It's been a pleasure and a privilege, and keep up your good work.
Thank you, Lyle. Okay, God bless everybody. We'll see you again next time.